Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar as part of Asset Management Awareness Month. We really appreciate you joining us today and hope you're getting a lot out of all of these webinars that we have made available this month. You will notice on your screen that there is a poll question. We'd like to kind of get an idea of where you are with ISO 55000 series before we jump into the presentation today. So if you wouldn't mind just answering that poll question while I go over just a couple of announcements, and then we will get into our official presentation. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that we are recording this session, and it will be posted on NPMA's YouTube channel. So any questions that are asked out loud will be made public. So you basically have a couple of options for how you can ask questions in the presentation. The first option is to ask your question out loud. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask out loud, you'll notice that there's a hand icon to the left of your name in the GoToWebinar panel. If you click on that hand icon, I will basically know that you have a question, and when we get to an appropriate time, more than likely that'll be at the end of the presentation, I will be able to unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. If you are called in using your phone, you'll need to make sure that your audio pin has been entered into the phone so that I'm able to unmute you. If you are on your computer mic and speakers, then you should be good to go for asking questions out loud. Alternatively, if you'd like to ask a question and remain anonymous, then you are welcome to do that by typing your question into the questions panel that you'll also see in your GoToWebinar panel. If you type that in, I'm the only one that will see it, and I will have our presenter answer the question at a later point in the presentation. So that would be your second option. The next thing I'd like to point out is that if you are an NPMA member, NPMA will be awarding 1 CEU credit at no charge to each member that is called in today. If you happen to be in a conference room as a group and you as an individual are not logged in to the GoToWebinar, if you could please have someone in your group send me an email, a chat message, or type into the questions box a list of who all is in the room with you, then I'll be sure that they get credit for participating today. Also, a couple of you will win an Amazon gift card in a random drawing at the completion of this webinar, so you'll hear from me in the next couple of days if you happen to be one of those winners. I believe that covers my announcement, so why don't I go ahead and close out the poll so we can see the results. And I'm going to share the results with the group. So for the question, which statement is most applicable to you? This is great. We've got 42% of you are aware of ISO 55000 but do not have plans to pursue it. 12% of you are aware and have plans to pursue this. 4% of you are in the process of pursuing, which is awesome. And 42% of you were not aware of this until now. So that's great. I think we're going to have a lot of great information to be shared today. We have our presenter, Arthur Kurland, who has got firsthand experience in not only going through the process of getting certified with ISO 55001, but being successful in that process. And I think he'll have a lot of good insight to share with us today. So with that, I am going to hide the poll and turn the presentation over to you, Art.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Arthur Kurland. I'm the Director of Asset Management at University Health System in San Antonio. And like Jessica said, we did go through the ISO 5001 certification process and were successful. So I'm going to be sharing our journey with you. So this first slide just is bullet points, the steps that were taken. The first 4 are controlled within the organization. The internal audit is independent, and then finally the last 4 bullet points will address the actual process of the certifying body. So I'm going to go through each of these slides. Decision to certify, the request for the proposal and vendor selection, receiving support and funding from the organization, the strategic asset management plan, internal audit, the stage 1 readiness assessment, the stage 2 audit, addressing nonconformities, and the actual issuance of the certification. So I would suggest to everyone who's thinking about going through this process is to understand why you want to do it. And so whether it's to avoid costly mistakes, or it can be used as a tool for collaboration with other departments, whatever the case may be, I would say to do some research and figure out, what the benefits are of certification, and be able to convey that to your senior leadership, because getting the support is key. You can't do this without support for senior leadership, and they're expecting you as a champion of this project to know the benefits of it. And in doing that, in my research, I found that the ISO 55000 series, it seemed to me there's a lot of literature on it that is for, say, plant assets or real property, and there's not very many examples of it in use in terms of personal property. But the concepts are all there, and they can be used, obviously, with personal property. And so, again, I would try to just get all your points together, and get all your benefits together, and get ready to address your senior leadership with those. And then along the same lines is you really need to know what this is going to cost. And so here it depends on your organization. And so let me just qualify now and say everything really, this is our experience at the health system. Everyone's might be a little bit different. So for example, here at the health system, when we request proposals, we have to be very transparent in how we do that. And so we have to solicit for bids. And so that's part of our methodology here. And you may need to get your procurement department involved too. But whatever the case may be, know what it is what it's going to cost you, including whether or not you might need to hire temporary help, or even if you might need a full-time position. But whatever those costs are, kind of have a really good idea of it. And if you know right off the top that those costs are going to be more than the benefits, then you're probably not even, it may not be worth it to approach your leadership, again, depending on your environment and the reasons why you want to do it. So once you know all the benefits and all the costs, that's when you want to approach your senior leadership, and you want to explain to them what it is you want to do and why you want to do it. And I am going to just refer you to an article that I wrote last year in the April 2017 edition of the Property Professional, and it's called Understanding Property Management's Impact on the Financial Statements. And I would suggest that you read that and be familiar with what the property management impact is on the financial statements. Because when you approach your senior leadership, there's a good chance that they're going to be looking at this in terms of the cost and the benefit and the money part of it. And so there's a lot of things that you can't quantify that this process delivers to the organization. So there's a famous saying that Helen Keller said, alone I could do little, and together we can do a lot. And you can't put a number on that. Or like Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. There's really very difficult to quantify that, but we know that those are true. And a lot of what the certification, just going through the process and preparing for it alone, gives you benefits that are very difficult to quantify. It gives you, your whole organization, a goal to work towards, which is helpful in lowering any barriers that there might be between departments, for example. And so, again, when you're approaching senior leadership for the support, it's good to see things through their eyes and on a financial perspective. So the more prepared you are to answer questions about that financial perspective, the more successful you're likely going to be in gaining their support. And it's essential that you have that support. Without it, you will not succeed. So the strategic asset management plan. So this is what I would call probably the meat and the potatoes of the whole asset management system. This particular document will be scrutinized the most heavily by the certification body, the CB. I'll just refer to them as CB, certification body, the auditor. And what they do is they will compare your strategic asset management plan with the ISO 55001 standard itself, and see that all the main topics are covered. Hopefully everyone has actually seen the ISO 5001 standard. If not, Jessica, are you there?
Art, say that again.
Yeah, I just want to see if you were there. If I move this on my screen, could you see that?
I can, yes.
Okay, so this is the actual standard, the ISO 55001 standard. And so when you're putting together your strategic asset management plan, what we did was, this is the table of contents on the actual standard. And if you look at the strategic asset management plan that we put together, which I'm going to put here side by side, you'll notice that it's almost identical. And so this is how you put together your strategic asset management plan. You look at the standard and you just look at the main topics and then the 24 subtopics, and you go through it point by point. And any time you see, like here, the words "the organization shall," you want to substitute that with the name of your organization, or at least make a reference to it. So here they're asking that the organization determine who all the stakeholder or the scope of the asset management system. So that's an interesting part of it too, is like when you do your go through the audit, you can define what your own scope is, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the idea here in putting together a strategic asset management plan is to be just real familiar with the standard itself, and wherever you can, and wherever it says the organization or the top management, you just want to put your company name and then what you do to fulfill what the standards are requiring you to actually do. And all of this will make it a little bit simpler to put together your strategic asset management plan. And then this plan has to be posted out there for all your stakeholders to get access to. So that's important too. And so what we did at the health system, and I'll see if I can do the same thing, is we have a intranet website, so it kind of made it a little bit convenient for us to do. So under our intranet, we have services, and most of the departments have a web page, and you can see I posted the strategic asset management plan right on our intranet site, so it's accessible to everyone, because that's one of the things that the CB auditor is going to do, not on the stage 1, but on the stage 2, is they're going to make sure that all the stakeholders know about the strategic asset management plan and at least know where to find it. They don't expect anybody to memorize it or to know what's in it, but at least know where to find it. And so, again, along with your corporate policy on asset management, this strategic asset management plan will be scrutinized the most. So next I want to talk about the internal audit. And the internal auditor that you select within your organization, it doesn't necessarily need to be someone in the internal audit department if you have one. It can really be anyone as long as they meet the qualifications of a internal auditor. And so what the CB auditor qualifications were for us is that somebody would have to go through at least a 16-hour course in ISO lead auditor training. And these courses are available online. So if you have someone and you want to have someone that's just really committed to doing this, they would have to take a lead auditor training course, at least 16 hours. Of course, more is always better. And then they also need to show evidence of being trained in asset management theory. They have to know kind of the concepts, like we learn in a CPPS or CPPA course. They have to know the concepts of asset management. And then finally, they have to be knowledgeable and competent in the 55001 standard. They have to know what that's all about. So anyone who could show evidence of that, the lead auditor training, knowledgeable about the ISO standard and be trained in asset management theory, they would qualify as a internal auditor. And so this process is very similar to the stage 2 audit that the CB auditor conducts. And what they do is the internal auditor will go through the standard, kind of like how I showed you when we wrote the strategic asset management plan. And they'll go through topic by topic and subtopic by subtopic, and they'll look for evidence of compliance, that you are complying with the standard. So they'll do that for every topic and subtopic. And they have their own document that they use to check off whether you're in compliance with that part of the standard or not. And so there's no gray area there. You're either in compliance with that part of the standard or you're not. And so they go through that, and then it's important too that they review the audit results with senior management, and they have to document that. So somebody from your senior leadership group has to be present when the results of the internal audit is being reported on. And the simplest way to do that is really just to have a meeting, call a meeting, and then have somebody there to take minutes on the meeting and have a sign-in sheet there so that you have evidence that the meeting took place, who was present at the meeting, and then what the meeting was all about. And of course, it should be about the results of the internal audit, and then any non-conformities that were discovered. That gives your organization an opportunity to correct those things before the actual audit takes place. So then there's, of course, between that point and this point, there's a lot of communication that goes on between the organization and the CB. You have to sign some papers with them. You have an application for certification, and that's basically a terms and agreement between the two parties. You have a confirmation letter that they'll send to kind of outline what they're engaged to do. There's some general questions that they need answered about the business, about what you do. And they also will include a preliminary audit plan for their stage 1 activities. And so once all of that documentation is signed off on by senior leadership and the certifying body, they'll make plans for a site visit, and they will look at your asset management system and just look and to make sure they're not looking for evidence of compliance to the standard, but they're looking for the documented evidence at this point. And so I would recommend that everything related to the asset management system is put together in a easy to use index binder for the auditor when the auditor arrives. And if you go through the standard, you'll see that they're going to need things like the organizational chart to see where asset management falls in the hierarchy. They're going to need things like job descriptions of the asset management staff. They're going to want to see the qualifications of the asset management staff, and here's where you want to put things like their certification, if they're CPPSs or whatever. You want to have copies of that to put together into the binder. And then, of course, they're going to want evidence of the management reviews. For example, the one we just talked about with the internal audit, where you have evidence that the meeting took place and the meeting minutes. So they're going to want to see all of that. And so the CB auditor comes hand in hand with their own audit schedule, with a questionnaire. And it's similar to the internal audit, where they go step by step through the standard, but instead of being black and white, being either in conformity or not in conformity, there's a little gray area where they will consider a partial. So you can be in partial conformity during the stage 1 audit. And so when they're finished with that, they again will have an audit report, and they'll have that again in front of senior leadership, and they'll tell you in their opinions where the organization is, whether whether you're in compliance with the standard, you're not in standard, or where you're partially in conformance with the standard. And so that partial conformance needs to be corrected, if there is any, needs to be corrected before they'll even consider scheduling a stage 2 audit. So during the stage 2 audit, then they'll come back, they'll give you time to put your partial conformity items into conformity, and then they'll come back and they'll address all those concerns that they thought were either non-conformance or partial conformance. And here's where they actually look for the evidence of compliance. So not just looking at the documentation as they do in the stage 1 audit. In this stage, they'll actually look for evidence of conformity in the documentation. They'll actually select samples and they'll actually interview people. For example, and again, and I alluded to it earlier about the scope of the certification. So for as we know, hopefully everyone has been through the CPPS course, and so we know there's a lot of phases to the life cycle in personal property. The acquisitions and the storage and et cetera, all the way through disposal. And so you're allowed to define your own scope of the audit. And so, for example, if you only wanted to be audited on, say, the acquisition phase and the inventory phase and retirement phase, if that's all you wanted to be audited on and limit your scope to just those life cycle phases, you can do that. And so this stage 2 audit really depends on the scope of your audit. So, for example, if part of your scope is on the acquisition of assets and the identification phase of the life cycle, where you're affixing asset tags to it, the CB auditor will actually observe that process and how it happens and how it's documented. So in other words, they examine the overall effectiveness of your asset management system based on your scope. So as they're doing this too, and these people have been to a lot of different industries, a lot of different businesses, and they've seen a lot of best practices. And so even though it might not be in the scope of their audit, it's possible that they might point out what they call opportunities for improvement. It really doesn't have anything to do with the certification itself. It's just they point out areas where they've seen similar things in the past and it worked, and they're just suggesting they might be opportunities for improvement. And part of being certified is that commitment to continuous improvement. So these things, should be taken seriously and maybe put in the project plan for future reference. So after the stage 2 audit is complete, the nonconformities to the standards are reported on. And again, this is another meeting that you have with senior leadership, and they talk about after the stage 2 audit, they'll tell you where your nonconformities are, and you have to put together what they call corrective action plans. And so the corrective action plan, and you kind of excuse me, you need to have a form in place to address nonconformities. I'm just going to take a sip of water, so just one second. And so I would suggest that you have a corrective action plan, and it's a form, and you have to address 5 different areas. So what you need to do is identify the nonconformity, and the simplest way to do that is just point out that part of the standard that is in nonconformance. And then the second thing, you need a section below that talks about what immediate steps that you're taking to mitigate negative consequences of that nonconformity. And then there's a third section to address what the root cause of that nonconformity is. In other words, why did that nonconformity occur? And then you need a fourth section of your template that is titled what your plans are to prevent that nonconformity from reoccurring. And then finally, the fifth part of that form is to show evidence, documented evidence of the effectiveness of your corrective action plan. And so at this point, the CB auditor has left the facility, and you communicate mainly via email with the nonconformities and how you're addressing them. And this might be a couple of back and forths on until they're satisfied with what your plan is to correct the nonconformities. And so and during this time, your certification status is going to be left in an open status until all these nonconformities are addressed. And you basically have 60 days to submit your corrective action plans to the CB auditor. And so once they're satisfied, and hopefully it's within that 60-day window, that you do have corrective action plans in place and that they are effective, it depends on the nonconformity whether or not they will come back to just do an examination of those nonconformities. So there are major nonconformities and there's minor nonconformities. And the CB auditor will determine which category the nonconformity falls under. And if it's a minor nonconformity, they don't need to come back. They just need to be satisfied with your corrective action plan. But any major nonconformity, even one, they'll have to come back and see the evidence of the corrective action. And so once those are all in place, the site visit is again scheduled, and if they have to come back, they will. And so they'll come back if you have any major nonconformities. In our case, we did, and they looked at our corrective action plans that they had previously agreed on, and they just wanted to see evidence that they were effective. And so once all of those things occur, the CB auditor will return with all the evidence of conformity, and they will show all their working papers to their manager of certifications in our case and in this case. And then the manager of certifications at the CB is the one to make the actual decision on whether or not to certify the organization. And in our case, that decision was made, and we were certified. And the certification is good for 3 years, and includes the year of certification. And then for the next 2 years, they just return for what they call surveillance audits. And that's just to make sure that we're still in conformance, first of all, and that we are working towards continual improvement. And so just to let you know some of our experience with the process, some of the measurable outcomes that we were able to achieve. And this was a 2-year process that it took from the very beginning, from that decision to certify, getting all the benefits, the cost, the senior leadership support, selecting a vendor, all the internal audit, everything I just covered. It was a 2-year process from start to finish. And over that length of time, we were able to to show measurable outcomes. We started keeping metrics on things that we weren't doing before. And a lot of that was due to this process that we went through. And so I'll share with you some of the measurable outcomes that we were able to achieve. And that is $270,000 we were able to receive in ancillary revenues from the disposal of assets no longer needed at our facilities, and those were basically through auctioning. We were able to reutilize over $68,000 worth of surplus assets, which prevented unnecessary purchases. So we put programs in place that we were able to offer to departments items that were no longer needed by other departments, but they were still in good condition. We were able to recycle over 120,000 pounds of recyclable material, which sort of supported our position as being good environmental stewards. And then also, really very importantly, the the collaboration between the departments were very transparent and open, much better documented, and people were working together for a common goal, and it just made for a really good work environment. And because of that, other projects and things are becoming easier to accomplish because we work so closely now, like we never did before. So I hope that this has been helpful for you in your journey to through the certification process. And if looks like we do have some time, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this point.
Thanks, Arthur. We do have some questions. So again, the two options, typing a question into the questions panel for anonymous or raising your hand if you would prefer to ask something out loud. So the first question I have for you is, where did you receive the most resistance within your organization to achieve the ISO certification?
That's a really good question. I would say that it was internal. A lot of departments worked in silos and were very resistant to work outside of their comfort zone. And so I think just being able to, and this is where I go back to just knowing what the benefits are and being able to explain to other people how this helps them. And if you can be prepared in being able to explain how this maybe helps them solve some of their problems, that's a really good ammunition to have, because all departments, they all have their own issues, and so if you can explain to them how this will help them solve their problems, that's a good way to overcome any obstacles. And we really didn't have too much pushback from our senior leadership, and that's really the critical point. It really came at more of a staff level, but once we were able to show how this would benefit them and the entire health system, and got them thinking in terms of the entire health system rather than just outside of their department, we were able to see that resistance, subside.
Great, thank you. The next question, Art, can you go back to slide 5?
This one?
We're talking about the article.
Oh, okay.
Where is that article? So wherever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, wherever it was that we were referring to the article that you wrote for the property professional, can you repeat what the title is of the article and where they can find it if they're interested?
Sure. The title is Understanding Property Management's Impact on the Financial Statements. And that was in the April 2017 edition of the Property Professional. And I'm glad somebody asked to repeat that, because I highly recommend that you be able to speak to senior leadership in their own language. And this article really explains how what the property professional does impacts the financial statement. Every time somebody takes an asset through a life cycle phase, there's a cost component to it. And this article outlines that, and it'll help you communicate with senior leadership a lot better once you understand that.
Thank you. And I'll add that if anyone is looking for a copy of that edition of the Property Professional, if you go on the Resources tab of the NPMA website under Publications and Property Professional, you can get a digital copy of all of those. That's where you can find it. Thanks, Art. The next question for you is, Do you have an example that can be shared or an idea of where someone could go to get examples of a strategic asset management plan?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it just brings back some of the flashbacks that we had because we were not able to find a strategic asset management plan for a hospital or a healthcare. Like I said earlier, if you just Google strategic asset management plans, you'll see that most of them, if not almost all of them, I would say, are related to real property and real or plant assets, structures, things of that nature. And so, as far as I know, ours is the first strategic asset management plan for a hospital, and maybe even to manage personal property. But like I was saying in the presentation, if you just take the actual standard and just mimic that, it will be a very useful guide in creating a strategic asset management plan. Just some backstory on ours. Like I was saying, we had no idea, no guidance on how to do this. And our first strategic asset management plan, it was just like 2 pages long. And the CB auditor found it totally unacceptable. And we went back and forth. We went through seven versions until they were finally satisfied with it. And that's the example that I showed you. That's about 30 pages long. So it's going to be a write and a rewrite.
Very good. Thank you. The next question is, what types of metrics did you add during this process?
Well, like some of the ones that I pointed out, the reutilization of surplus assets, the recycling efforts, our inventory. We were able to show, like, we're a pretty big health system. We have over 30 some odd facilities. We have outpatient clinics besides the main hospital. And so we were able, we showed senior leadership on a monthly basis where we were in the inventory process. We have metrics now on how much idle time, and we have goals too. So like when we pick up an asset that is no longer needed by a department, it goes through a screening phase, and we determine what to do with that asset during that screening phase. So while it's in screening, we decommission the asset. And so one of our goals is to not let assets just sit around idly and not do anything. So we have like a two business day goal that we don't want an asset to remain in decommission any longer than that. So that's another metric that we report on, that, you know, we're getting assets just aren't sitting around doing nothing. We put a work order system in place too, because like I said, we get a lot of requests for either surplus assets or to dispose of assets. And so we have a work order system now that we put into place, and people's work orders are put in a queue, and those work orders go through an approval process. So we're able to report on that now too, how many work orders we get. And really, personally for me, this helped me get staff, because I was able to show just the volume of work orders that we get, and show the area of coverage that we need to cover and the number of people that we support. And so that these metrics really will help you in developing your departments and your program, because you have that evidence documented to show what it is you're doing, what your goals are, what's causing you from preventing you to get to your goals. And so you can use all of that when you approach senior leadership to your advantage. So our metrics, once we achieve our goal, they change. We're constantly looking to improve. So those are just some of the examples of some of the metrics that we've reported on over the past couple of years.
Thank you. So the next question that we have is, we think we have a good process in place for asset management, but not really sure where you would get started if you would like to consider becoming ISO 55001 certified. So what steps would you recommend taking to get that process kicked off?
Well, I would recommend looking at the benefits again of having the certification, the ISO certification, and what you have now, and see if those additional benefits of being certified will help. Like for us, we're a public entity. We are supported by taxpayer, funding in some portion, not all of it, but we do get taxpayer support. And so for us to show our tax base that we are good stewards of their investment dollars is a big plus. So we're giving some assurance to our tax base that we understand the value of their investment dollars. So again, you really need to look at your organization and determine the additional benefits that you can get out of the certification. Again, having an organizational goal just by itself can be a huge benefit. You can get departments to collaborate with you if you can get them on board with that goal, and if it's senior leadership supported, that's easier to do. And so I don't know of your particular organization, but I know in my past, in an organization that I've been through, a lot of departments, they kind of work in silos, and it makes a world of difference when those walls come down and you can work collaboratively. So that's just one of those benefits that you just can't put a dollar amount on.
Thank you. Next question. Would you say that it required significant changes to your asset management operations to pursue this certification?
Well, like that previous question, I mean, we had processes in place, but I think so in the way things are documented. And so now, whereas before, if somebody just called and asked for something, we might have been inclined to do it. Everything that we do now is documented, and that has been proven to be very beneficial, because this way, people, they can't say they said something but meant something else once everything is in writing and everything's documented. And then things change too. Like, for example, before I got here, even the policy on asset management, it hadn't been updated in I won't tell you how many years, but it was a long time. And so part of the being certified is, one of the requirements is to have your documents, a documents log, and it's in the standard that you have to review your documents periodically. And so what we've done is we've created a documents log of all the reports and all of the manuals and all the different work orders and documentation that comes in and comes out of our department. And these things, they have to be reviewed periodically. So we have a review date next to each document, so that helps keeps your documentation up to date too. Because if it's out of sight and out of mind, it falls behind, and your processes are ahead of your documentation. So every time we change a process, we update our documentation, and that documents log is a reminder that we have to do that. So in those regards, our processes have improved. They've been enhanced. It was pretty good before, but I think it's a lot better now.
Great, thanks. The next question we have is, would you mind sharing what your process is for identifying idle assets? Okay, so we have, like I said earlier, part of our process is that screening process. And if you're familiar with the fundamentals of personal property, you know
what I'm referring to when an asset gets screened. So we developed a form. It's a screening form. So when we pick up an asset that is no longer needed by a department, it gets brought down to an area, a screening area, and we evaluate it. And so there are two people that have to agree on what to do with this with this asset that is no longer needed by a department. And so on this form we grade it by condition, and then we also determine its disposition. So there are options. It's, can we reutilize this asset is an option. Can we not reutilize this asset, and is there value in auctioning it off, or maybe there's only salvage value? So in our database, the system that we use to keep track of all of our assets, we have those dates that when these things occur. So when we pick up an asset and we bring it in for screening, that date is updated with the current date. And then when that asset status changes from decommissioned to whatever we decided, whether it be reutilize it or auction it, that date that status changes is also updated. So every month we are able to compare those two dates: the date that it was brought in for screening, and then the date that it was placed in a status other than decommissioned. And that's how we measure the length of time an asset is sat idle. And our goal is to be 2 business days or less.
Thank you. Can you share with us what some of the incremental costs were associated with implementing the accreditation, the certification?
So, again, it depends on where the organization is now and how much work is involved in getting it up to in compliance with the standards. But the initial cost would be just based on the scope of what of your certification, because the CB auditor or the CB the body will base their rate depending on how much work they have to do. So if your scope is small, it'll be less than if your scope was large, obviously. And so it just depends on how much work is involved as far as that's concerned. Internally, it's really difficult to measure the costs. Yeah, there is some work involved in getting your documents up to standard, so to speak, but it's something that ought to be done anyway, really. There's not really a downside to having good documentation, and 80% of this standard is having good documentation, and the other 20% is just being able to provide evidence that you're doing what you say you're doing. So it's a difficult question to answer. It just depends on how much work is involved taking what you currently have and getting it in compliance with the standards demand.
Great, thank you. Next question. Did the idea of becoming ISO 55000 compliant start with top management or at a different part of your organization?
No, so that actually came from me. So I was kept current on the standard when it was going through the process before it was published, going through the drafts, and I saw that what was being done and the benefits of it, and so I actually put that cost and benefit analysis together and approached our senior leadership with that idea and they felt the same way that I did, that there was really no downside to doing it. The cost really justified the benefits that we were theoretically been able to achieve, and since then actually have achieved. So it wasn't a top-down decision, but it was supported by the top.
Thank you. Next question. Where can someone go to find the ISO standard?
Well, I got my copy from the CB itself. The certification body provided us a copy, but I did get a draft, and there are drafts available if you just Google it. And I compared the draft to the final published version, and they're very, very, very similar. So, as a matter of fact, that's what I worked off of, was one of the final drafts, and I would say that would suffice for you to use. If you want to buy it, you can go to ISO website. And the standard is available for purchase.
Thank you. Next question. Having been through this experience, would you do it over again?
Yes, I would do it again. I thought, as I said before, the benefits totally outweighed any costs. We have a sustainable asset management system now. So if I leave, somebody could step into my role, and the asset management, the system would not be disrupted. Everything would continue. If I have staff that leave, it makes training new staff much easier because everything is standardized. We have processes in place that are documented. So from that respect, yes, definitely would do it again. There's some work involved. I don't want to kid anybody, but overall, it's a time saver when you think about things like that.
Great. I think this is our last question. Are you able to, and are you willing to share the cost-benefit analysis example?
I don't have it readily available right now at my fingertips. I would have to do some digging. Again, this was 2 years ago when we started this, so I will have to look for what I presented to senior leadership. Again, if you can speak to your senior leadership in their language, and I'm going to refer to that article again, it's going to help you. You can't just approach them with, ambiguous terms and just say it'll help us if we do this. You need to be very specific. And so I work closely under the finance umbrella, so I have access to our CFO, deputy CFO, controller, and so I can sit with them face to face and explain to them some of the issues that we're having with our personal property, and how going through this process can avoid some of the negative experiences that we're having. And so it helps when you are able to speak to them in their language, know what the problems are. So if you have receiving problems, or if you have problems where assets are not getting to their destination, things like that, and if you can show how this will fix those problems, that's a long way. You've gone a long way of going there to justify doing this.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Art, and thank you everyone on the phone for providing all of these great interactive questions. We really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with us, Art.
Okay, and I'll just leave my information there. Anybody, feel free to send me an email, and I want to thank you for joining in on this webinar today. I hope it was helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great afternoon.